Well, I'm Joe. Welcome to the Break It Down show.
I love it. This is one of the sheer delights of having a show, Joe, is being able to talk with wonderful people, and you certainly qualify. Let me just say this before we go any further.
Okay.
You've already sold 2 books, and we're 2 seconds into this show. I bought 2 because I'm going to give one to a friend, and that's what all of you should do as well. So here's the link for Joe's book right there, Almost a Century. It's on Amazon. You know what I always say, what I just did, buy 2, get one for a friend, and buddy read. All right, so now that we talked about that, Joe,
Okay.
I'm trying to hear about your book and your life. And your book is called Almost a Century because you were born in 1929.
I
What's
caused
the
the crash.
you caused the crash? Oh, see, there you go. Yeah, you shook the world.
Uh,
What's your
I-
first memory?
my, I'm sorry.
What is your first memory?
Okay. I remember the 1930s up until about 1935 when I was about 6 years old, and I had a pony. It was really our family's pony, but I was the only one who really liked him, and his name was Jimmy. And Jimmy and I had lots of exciting experiences. Did you want to hear about one, or are you going to read it?
Sure, I'd love to hear about
Well,
one. Yeah.
one day we had a little wooden wagon, and I've seen pictures of it in our family albums. It was just a little wooden, homemade wagon with great big, sort of funny looking wheels. And one day I had a very good idea. My idea was this. My brother was Mike, and he thought all my ideas were just great. Well, I looked at that little wagon and I looked at Jimmy, and I thought, I should be able to hook Jimmy up to that little wagon. And Mike, wouldn't that be fun? Well, Mike thought that was a great idea. So I went to our barnyard and went into our big barn. I was looking for things that maybe I could use for a harness. And you know what I found? I
Mm.
found a long piece of rope. And I thought, ooh, this is great. So I went back out to the wagon and to our pony Jimmy. And I told my brother Mike to sit in the wagon. And I tied the one end of the rope to the wagon's tongue. You know what I mean by the tongue. And I quieted Jimmy down. He was having a good time because he liked to play with us too. And I tied the other end to, guess what? Jimmy's tail.
Tail?
Now, that would have been all right because Jimmy was a pretty, well, nicely tempered little pony. But I picked up an old 2 by 4 and gave Jimmy a little whack on his
Oh.
back. And that startled him, and he started running, and that wagon went all, lip, 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 all the way down till it hit a rock. And the wagon flew into 100 pieces. Fortunately, Mike did not uh, go into 100 pieces, and I don't remember whether I was punished for that or not. But by that time, even when I was just 6 years old, my parents could tell that I was really out to get the world. So I did a lot of things that were not bad. They weren't even mischievous. I was using my creativity.
Mm.
So anyway,
Yeah,
that's one story. That's the
that is
story.
one story. I'm gonna
That's the
put cover
story
the book up here.
there, and that's my book, and that story is
Yeah.
the second story thing in my book. Anyway, it's a fun book, and my friends are telling me this is what I wanted to do. I'm never dreamed I'd be publishing a book, but about a year before he passed away, about 6 years ago, my husband and I had fun recollecting some of the interesting things we did because we were in Fairbanks, Alaska, and we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of energy. Anyway, so a year before Dick passed away, we started writing stories, and one of the main stories that we had fun writing was Dick had purchased a little log cabin, and he'd also purchased a lot about 10 miles from that little cabin. He had purchased a lot that was only about a mile from the university. And when we were preparing to make our home, Dick, I said, well, Joe, where do you want to live? Do you want to live a mile from the university? Or do you want to live out here on 10 miles from town? I said, oh, I want to live by the university. So Dick had to figure out how to move it. Well, that's a real story, and I cannot really relate it in this, but it took a lot of engineering, and Dick had never done anything like this. He was a city boy. He and his dad and mom were divorced when he was very young, so he never had a father figure. So he had to figure out all these things by himself.
That is a fantastic story about, how you get things done, moving closer to town or being further out. You've seen so many changes.
Oh my
I was
God.
looking in through your book, and when you guys got electricity at your farm and started
Yes.
to have lights around,
Yeah.
I mean, this is how far back in time we're going to go. Is
But
hey,
yeah,
we have
but you
electricity,
know what?
please. What?
I never thought about it, but in the 1930s, we were the only people in our neighborhood who had electric lights. And I never said to my dad and mom, oh, how come we have electric lights and the other neighbors don't have them? Well, evidently, didn't ask it when I was a little child. But as I grew older, one day I asked my mother when I went back to visit her about 40 years later, and I said, Mother, why did we have electric lights and nobody else did? And she said, well, we had a 32-volt Delco plant that generated enough electricity so we could have lights, electric lights, but there wasn't enough electricity to have a refrigerator, for example. So your dad had to go out to Mina Lake and harvest some ice and brought it home in the wintertime and put it down in the ice cellar that he had built, which was just a few steps down into the dirt. And then he put some boards on the bottom of that new little floor for the ice to sit on. And then whenever Mother was running out of ice in the kitchen for her ice box, why, she'd say, Eddie, I need some ice, please. So my dad would go down that ice cellar and chip off a block of ice, probably about a foot each way, and bring it back in a wagon and put it in a big compartment in the ice box. And the ice box kept everything cool. Didn't make anything freeze, but it kept everything cool. That was
It
all.
occurs to me that this.
And the other thing that it was a picture of in the book that was, it was on the wall in the creamery room, or he had the cream separator. That's another story. Anyway, there were a whole bunch of glass jars, sort of. They were squarish. And I didn't ever ask my dad what it was, but when I asked my mother about the electric lights, she said, do you remember that wall that had all those glass jars? Or they were bottles, they were sort of square, big. And I said, I do remember them. And she said, well, that they had lead and other things in them, and that's what kept the generator going, so they could generate electric lights. So that was it. So Dick and I wrote a story about that.
That's incredible. It occurs to me that the ice story is very similar to what I read from Laura Ingalls WIlder's youth when they would go out and take ice out of the lake. You guys are from the same part of the nation.
Wasn't she Nebraska?
Well, I think she did some Nebraska time, and she also was in South Dakota, I believe.
Well, see, that's where I grew up, in South Dakota.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and Minnesota as well.
Oh, they're all good places. You betcha. That's what they always used to say. You betcha.
You betcha. Yeah, yeah. When you think about your life, 96 years in now, what was it that you did? What was your profession? What did you do?
Well, that's a real long story, but I'll make it short.
Okay. Don't make it too short. We got time. We're here to listen to you.
Okay. Well, I loved music, and in the 1930s, the radio wasn't very old. If you remember your history, 10 years old at the most. But in South Dakota, there was a radio station on WNAX, I think it was, Yankton, South Dakota, and they played a lot of classical music. Not only classical music, but they played church music, they played gospel music, they played big band, they played opera. They just did everything, and I say that's where I got my music education, because I loved all those kinds of music. And so when as I was growing up on the farm, we went to a small town church, St. John's Lutheran Church. And when I taught myself how to read music, and when I was about 9 years old, and I started playing and reading music in hymns, and I had such fun. And anyway, so when I was playing, people at the church knew, of course, that I played. And so one day they asked me if I would be the organist for the church, that little church. And you know what the organ was? Not any kind of an electric organ, certainly not a pipe organ. It was a pump organ. You pumped with your feet.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying? And
I do.
Okay, and so I started being an organist there when I was about 15. And then when I also taught Sunday school. I just loved little kids, and I knew I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up. There was one funny story, and I went to a little one-room schoolhouse myself. It was a tiny, tiny room. I don't think it could have been more than 18 by 18, if that large. At any rate, there was an old pump organ in that school too, because people didn't have pianos. I don't know how they had money to buy an organ, but they did. So anyway, I was playing the organ when I was 18 years old. I was playing the organ at that church, and I was also teaching Sunday school. And that was, as I said, when I was 18. And a clerk from a little one-room country schoolhouse came to me one Sunday. I would be graduating from high school in one more month. Anyway, this fellow, his name was Irv. He came and said, Miss Ryman, we've been watching you. You really do such a good job playing the organ, and you're so good at teaching these Sunday school kids. They just love you. We'd like to have you teach in our school this fall. I said, wait a minute, how can that be? I've never taken any teacher training classes. And he said, well, this is the deal. It was after the war, you know. And he said, it was getting to be very hard to find any teacher to come in a teacher one-room schoolhouse for one main reason. Not that you wouldn't be smart enough, that's not him, but the other thing you had to be when you were a one-room school teacher, you had to be the janitor. And being the janitor also included that this is South Dakota, not Arizona where it's warm in the winter, South Dakota where it's windy. I'd have to get to school by at least 6:30 in the morning to get the fire started every day in the winter, so the schoolhouse would be warm when the children came at 9. And so he said, what you have to do this summer in order to get a chance to teach there, you have to go to the Northern State Teachers College and take 3 classes this summer. That was in 1947. And he said, you'll have to have a class in how to teach science, how to teach reading, and how to teach math. And if you pass all those classes, and if the teachers feel you have a potential for being a good teacher, then you can take a state test. And I passed all those classes, of course. And so the state test was, but it wasn't an IQ test. It was more of an awareness test. Do you understand anything that's going on in the world? And
Right. Okay.
my goodness, that's over 70 years ago. And I still remember one of the questions that they asked in that
What? Yeah,
test.
okay.
And you're going to think it's funny. One of the questions was, who won the World Series this year?
Oh,
Because
okay.
all of us on the farm, we loved baseball. And this was big time to be listening to the World Series. So, in other words, they were thinking that if anybody who wants to be a teacher had no idea who won the World Series, they couldn't be much aware about anything that went on in the world. So that was how I got started teaching in my little one-room country school. And I loved it, and I loved the children. And you know what? I'm still in touch with some. It was a farm community. Their ancestors had been homesteaders in that area of South Dakota in the 1880s.
Wow.
And those kids, parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents, they all sort of stayed right there in that homesteaded area. So I taught there for 3 years in this beautiful little one-room country schoolhouse. I made curtains half curtains for the windows. And you know what? In 1947, they weren't paying attention to weather stripping at all. My curtains that I hung sort of waved bravely inside the schoolroom. Can you imagine that? Well, anyway, I love that. I never had more than 8 to 10 students, and I had all 8 grades. And I still remember the names of all those kids. And there's a story about this in my book. But anyway, let's transport myself in time back to when I was about 8 years old,
Okay.
and was going to a little one-room country school. And one day the teacher said to me, Jo, if you'd like, you can give the first graders their spelling tests. Oh, man, I guess I thought I was on top of the world because I really wanted to be a good teacher. Well, evidently, I was a little too bossy or something, because I was doing fine with these 2 little boys in the first grade, and here I was a couple of years older. And one day, this one little boy got mad at me, and he plumped his book on the table, and he said, "You ain't the boss." In other words, I was being too bossy.
Yeah.
But that didn't squelch my desire to become a teacher. And I went on and taught there for 3 years. And, I'm still, as I started saying, I'm still in touch with the remaining students who were in those classes.
Wow.
In fact, I've lost 4 of them. They died way before I did. I have been living longer than they did, is what I'm trying to say. And one girl, Shirley Foreman Morgan, she just turned 90. So I was only 6 years older than she was. I was her 7th and 8th grade teacher, and then she was prepared to go to high school in Warner. But I had such fun doing things with the children. I love them. And the secret to teaching is this: if the kids know that you love them, they're going to love you.
Mm.
And it works. I'd put my life on it. And anyway, I have heard teachers say, and that's not very nice, they shouldn't have said it. They'd say, "Oh, I see that you have Johnny Jones in your class this year. He's the worst little kid." Well, I really wanted to say to her, Johnny Jones is in my class, and I just love him, and he knows I love him, and he's the best student that I have. But I never had the nerve to say that back to anybody when they were complaining about kids. That's the secret.
Yeah.
And every time, all these years that I started teaching over 70 years ago, the kids are still. I was called on once to finish teaching a high school English class, and I just got a story about that in the book. And the deal with that was, it was Thanksgiving time, and the superintendent called me and said, "Oh, Joe," I was just staying home with my little baby at the time, and he said, "Joe, our teacher in the high school junior and senior in English, she's not well, and she has to quit teaching. And I see by your credentials that you have a minor in English. I really wish you'd take over and be the teacher." And I said, "Well, I really wanted to stay home with my little child." And he said, "I'll try to find somebody by semester. If you'll just do it until semester, I'd be so grateful." So I said, "Okay." Dick and I have talked about it, and we decided that'd be fine. Well, I was petrified the first day I went to school after Thanksgiving vacation that Monday. I thought, "Oh my gosh, I've never taught senior highs before. I never thought I'd teach English. I loved English, and I loved English literature, but I didn't think that I would ever be teaching this." So anyway, I was prayerful, and I said, "Dear God, guide me. I've got to do something really exciting with these kids this first class time." So this is what I did. Everybody likes to talk about themselves, right?
Yeah.
So what I did was I got the kids talking about what they had for their goals in life. What do you dream that you could do? And the kids were having so much fun. And I was too, because they asked me to write about my life. Of course, their lives were sort of different than mine because we were different ages. But at any rate, everybody was having fun except for one boy. And he was smart, he was handsome, but he just didn't want to participate in anything. He sort of sat back. Just picture him now in your mind. He was in the back of the room with all the front of chairs in the front of desks in the front of the room, and he never said anything. He wasn't bad. Well, come to find out, the reason that I'll say that her name was Miss Smith. The reason Miss Smith had to leave school was we would know today that she was suffering terribly from depression. And it's very sad to think that was way back in 1955, 56. We didn't talk about depression in those days. Anyway, this is what some of the smart boys in that class did. I didn't find this out until a month or two after I started teaching. One of the kids would be the leader. And if the leader would hold up his hand to his face, the whole class, hold up their hand to their face. And then if the leader would raise his hand, they'd all raise their hand. And if the leader would look out the window, they'd all be staring out the window. Well, that did not help Miss Smith one bit. And so that's what I walked into when I started teaching after Thanksgiving vacation in 1956, I think it was, in Fairbanks, Alaska. Well, I had the kids all having fun, telling about what their dreams were and how they could make a living, etc. So I've got two parts of the story. I want to talk to you about this one boy. I'll say that his name was Andrew. Andrew, who didn't want to participate in anything, but thought he was the king of the class. And then the other thing that happened that made a change. Okay, so the kids had fun talking about what their dreams were. And I tried to introduce good music to them. And I remember that I invited all the senior class, it was about 15 kids, to my home one Saturday. And I had cinnamon rolls baking in the oven, so it smelled sort of good in the house. And I introduced them to the opera Carmen. And I was smart enough, I got librettos, that of course, if any of you don't know what a libretto is, it's the words to the opera. I had secured words to the opera, so then we listened to parts of the opera that I had told them about, because we didn't have time to sit through 2 hours. Anyway, it was a very successful day, and the kids loved it. And when they went out home, when their parents came after them, why, everybody got a cinnamon roll. They were great, big grandma-type cinnamon rolls. Anyway, but guess what? Andrew never came. He didn't want to, he didn't even say, I'm sorry, Mrs. Scott, but I cannot come. So the kids all knew that Andrew had a problem. But I was really prayerful about what can I do to get this kid to wake up and be a part of the class. So I had a bright idea on Valentine's Day. By that time, I'd been teaching there since November. And so when the kids, my senior class got into the classroom that day, and we all sat down, and I acted very, sort of dramatic. Like I said, well, I really appreciate the way you kids have latched on to be so kind to me, because you know that I love each one of you, and I'm eager to have you succeed in life. And because it's Valentine's Day, it's supposed to be a day when we show our love and thoughtful love to all our classmates. I'm going to give each one of you a great big kiss. Well, they all just about fainted. And then I said, and I'm going to start with you, Andrew. So I started walking. Picture this in your mind now. Started walking through by all these desks with all these students, with my arms reached out like I was waiting to find Andrew. I finally got to Andrew's desk, and he was blushing 16 million colors. And I pulled out a bag I had. And in the bag, guess what I had? Candy kisses. So I plunked the candy kiss down on Andrew's desk and said, Happy Valentine's Day. And I left, and the kids all roared. And you know what? That broke Andrew's silence, because the joke was on him. He was always the one that was playing mean jokes on people. But so that had a happy ending. There are I have a lot of teacher stories. I have lots of teacher stories, and I've talked about them in my book. But I really loved teaching, and I never taught when I didn't feel like it. Now, that doesn't mean that in the morning one day I got up and I didn't feel like going to teaching. I mean that in May of every year, my husband Dick and I would sit down, and he was getting into business for himself, some retirement planning. So we didn't have a lot of money, but he decided, we talked about whether or not I should sign a contract and teach for another year. And I said, I don't feel like I have the energy. I don't want to do that again. I've been there, done that. But I said, you know what I could do? Let's ship my little small grand piano back that I'd left in South Dakota. Let's ship it here, and I'll give piano lessons. So that's what we did. We packed up ahead of H&S Warehouse, who's the one whose delivery was in Fairbanks, and it was just fun. I ended up with lots of piano students. I could teach right in my own home, and I had a good time.
What is your favorite holiday, Jo?
Okay,
you've been to a lot of holidays. What's your favorite one?
Yeah. My favorite holiday. Oh my. When I was a little kid, probably Christmas was special. And we, as I said, no, we were all poor. We didn't know we were poor because we didn't have any television blurting out a bunch of ads to buy a Susie Q doll. But I remember how excited I was to have the Christmas stocking. And we had an orange in it and some nuts. And I remember one little toy. I had a little dolly bed that I just loved. And then my older sister, Alice Ruth got me a doll in 1935 when I was 6 years old. And I treasured that doll. Didn't lose that doll until 1967 in Fairbanks, Alaska, when we had a flood. And I lost all my little dolls. But probably Christmas, I loved having company, even when our house was small, our little cabin before we added on to it and kept adding on to it. I loved having dinners there. And our family had built a swimming pool. And we landed on the moon, landed in the pool, finished the day that man landed on the moon. That was that 1969, was that? Anyway, and we had horses. I had to have a horse. Couldn't live without a horse. So we had Tom Thumb, who was about 30 years old in our community. The 30 for and a horse is about the equivalent of about 90 for a person. Otherwise, for holidays, just mostly people, friends coming. Dick and I never bought expensive presents for each other. When we were first married, we had a good time because what we did is, by the way, in those days, in Fairbanks in the 1940s and 50s, we were married in the 1950s, we didn't really have a lot of dress shops in Fairbanks. We didn't have a big drugstore. Very small, very small. And what Dick and I did, I remember this was our first Christmas, I think, is we went to our Sears Roebuck catalog and we picked out a bunch of things that we liked for ourselves. And then we went home and wrapped them. And then on Christmas Day, we exchanged presents, and the ones that I bought for me, I said to Jo from Dick, and there were all the things that I had ordered. And then the things that Dick had picked out for himself, why, I wrapped up and I said, to Dick from Jo. That was our Christmas.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Did you like Alaska better than, say, South Dakota? And where else have you lived? Yeah, obviously you did some school in California. Where have you been?
Well, first place, it's sort of like, which child do you like best? I loved my family. I loved my family. My 3 children still mean so much to me. At any rate, I left. Well, this is another story. I had a lot of nerve when I was a little kid. I was telling you the story about tying that rope to Jimmy's tail. I wanted to succeed in everything I did. And I worked hard. I learned how to work hard on the farm. Anyway, now I got to collect my thoughts what I was going to say.
Well, I was asking you what your favorite place to live
all right.
was.
I got my thoughts again. Okay, so I taught for 3 years, and in that wonderful school, and a little teeny more, a pretty big school that was that I taught at. It even had a basement, and there was a farm furnace in the basement. That's what I had to clean up every day. At any rate, I was taught 1 year, and I was going to thinking of going only 1 year to teaching 1 year, and then be going to college at Northern State Teachers College, so I get my certificate. And then that's when I got offered a job, and so I taught another year at the same school, and then taught a 3rd year. But then by that time, I said to my school board, "Thank you for believing me. I love this little school, and I love my students, but I really want to get a 4-year degree, because this is the deal. In South Dakota in 1947, farm girls, at least in my area, maybe in some areas this is different, but in my area, girls were not encouraged to go to college. Sometimes girls would work for a year in the 5 and dime, and then they'd get married. Some of them got married right out of high school. One of my friends actually took nurses training, and she was in school for a year, and then was a nurse, and then she got married. So here I was, age 21, 1950. I had a big decision to make. I was very happy teaching. I loved my families. I loved my They all loved me. I was making pretty good money by that time for those days. And I had this wonderful farm boyfriend. And if should I give up all of that just to go to college? Because that's what I dreamed I wanted to do. Well, finally, I decided this is it. If I didn't quit teaching now, probably I'd end up being there for 25 years, like some of my other friends were. So I had my last year of teaching there in 1950, in May, and I made a little annual for every child. I took pictures throughout the year, so everybody got a little annual that had pictures of our Christmas program and our library corner and new book library area that our Grandpa Shane had made, all these fun things. So also the Minneapolis Symphony came to Aberdeen, and they were offering student prices. So I talked to all my parents, and I said that I wanted to, it was a Saturday, and I wanted to take the children to the symphony. And one of the parents said, see, I had a little 37 Ford, and I could take a few, and then one of the parents drove, and she could take the others. Well, this is the deal. I knew that I had to prepare these children to go to this concert. In other words, you couldn't just sit them down in front of an orchestra and expect that they were going to enjoy it. So what I did was to get recordings. The paper published what they would be playing that Saturday for the students. So I got recordings of all the things that were going to be played. I told them about the conductor. His name was, what was his name? He was the Greek conductor, Dimitri Mitropoulos. He was the conductor. He was Greek. And I loved the Minneapolis Symphony so much myself. And then what they did too is they had an artist on stage for one of the pieces, and an artist painted the picture of how he was feeling by listening to the music that the orchestra. You catch on what I'm saying? I always try to integrate music and the arts, all the arts. So anyway, I said to the parents, get your kids all dressed up in their fanciest clothes so they can go to the concert on Saturday. So they were all dressed up, and I dressed up, and the parent that drove them all dressed up, and we all went up there to the Civic Center in Aberdeen. Concert was wonderful, and it's certainly the children. In fact, as some children mentioned to me, that still write to me, that that's where they first learned to appreciate classical music, about things that I did in class. So anyway, and soon after we enjoyed the concert, I took them all out to Dairy Queen. And they all had ice cream. So it was a very fun day, and kids remembered it for years. And the orchestra, of course, was wonderful. I loved the Minneapolis. It was the Minneapolis Symphony. I think now it's the Minnesota Symphony. At any rate, that was another exciting thing that I did for the kids.
How did you discover that you loved symphony opera? I mean, to know about librettos, right? Like all of these things. How did you discover that you loved that?
That's a good question, because I sort of am interested right now, wondering how in the world I did this. But the first thing to answer is that my mother had a very good ear herself, and she turned the radio on. It was the radio that educated me. But then when I got older and started becoming, this was another fun story. I just was crazy about music. And I remember very well, and I remember how old I was because I remember where we were living at the time. It was in 1939. And we had a radio that sat on a counter. You know what I'm talking about? It's sort of shaped like just a little radio. I remember sitting in front of that radio in 1939 when I was born in 29. So when I was 10 years old, and I was listening to, I of course don't remember what opera, but I was listening to an opera, and it was such beautiful music. And I thought to myself, what, I wonder, but there must be a way that I could get words to this. I had no idea how to do that because my parents didn't know anything about opera. My teachers didn't know anything about opera. So I started reading. And I remember Milton Cross. If you ever listened to the radio on Saturdays, you'd hear the Metropolitan Opera program, and Milton Cross was the announcer. He had this wonderful voice. And he was actually still the announcer in 1929 and 1939, and also in 1949. That's when 1949. It was 20 years after the first time I'd heard the music. Anyway, I got his book. I practically wore out that book. I took a picture of it. I think it's in my stories, because I just had fun reading about all these operas. And I thought, wow, I wish I could get to New York sometime and see them and hear them. Well, one year I went to summer school at the University of South Dakota in Vermilion. And in May of that year, and that would have been about 1950, the Metropolitan Opera Company was touring the United States. They had money in those days. And they were going to be coming to Minneapolis for a week. I think it was only 4 days. And you know what? A teacher who knew that I loved music so much, she and a couple of her friends were going to be driving to Minneapolis to hear the Metropolitan Opera in person. And she said, Jo, I know you like opera so much. My friends and I are driving to Minneapolis. Would you like to ride along with us and go to the operas? Well, that was my first big break. And I wish I could remember her name now so I could give her credit. But that was the kindest thing for this teacher. Of course, I was a little bit older, I was 21, 22. But still, I was a student. We drove, it was about 300 miles from Vermilion to Minneapolis. Went to Northrop, I think was the name of it. This is all coming back to me as I'm talking. I think it was the Northrop Auditorium in Minneapolis. Not only did the opera travel with all their costumes, just imagine this, think about what it would take. Their costumes and their wigs, everything that they needed, and the programs. And I saw 4 operas that weekend.
Wow.
I saw Pagliacci. I saw Women Are Like That. Was it Così fan tutte, Madame Butterfly, and Carmen. And
so good.
I kept all those programs, and I kept.
Did you wear a red dress when you saw Carmen?
Oh, I don't think I had them. I didn't have much money to have much choice.
Right.
But I do remember I wore my finest clothes because this was something. This was something. And then I learned from those people. I learned a lot of things from people. I don't think I learned an awful lot sometimes in some of my classes, but I caught the wisdom that the teachers were like. When you grow older, you're supposed to be becoming wiser every year. That's when you can look back and say, that sure was a dumb thing I did when I was 8 years old. Tying a rope from Jimmy's tail was a pretty dumb thing to do. Well, at the moment, it was a genius of an idea.
Right, yeah. But not all dumb things, though, right? I mean, I'd like to hear about you and Dick falling in love and the Sourdough Club.
Oh, and the sourdough what?
The Sourdough Dance Club. And
the
class.
Okay, you're a good interviewee. because you are asking right questions.
Thank you.
When we were married in 1954 in Fairbanks, Alaska, goodness, I don't think that there were more than 8 or 10,000 people living within a radius of 30 miles at that time. Homesteading was pretty popular. At any rate, so that was bringing people to Fairbanks. But Fairbanks had a little theater at that time, and my new friend Shirley Callahan, who introduced my husband Dick and I, anyway, she was in that little theater. I remember this, gosh sakes, it takes me way back to 1955. In September, they put on Harvey. You remember the
Sure.
play Harvey? Well, they played it it was a dance hall. I mean, a carpenter's hall, and they had dances there. And so, okay, well, let's see, where do I want to go with this? So let's just talk about that. There wasn't much for entertainment. I mean, we didn't have any big, we had some concert association stuff, but that was just a few times a year. But there wasn't much else going on as far as entertainment. So one of the things that we did so much was folk dancing and square dancing. Dick and I met when he fixed a Mexican dinner because he was pretty good at that. And then that Saturday, in September of 1953, this was, after our dinner, we all got on our fancy dresses for square dancing and folk dancing. And so on one Saturday, there was 2 Saturdays. I mean, every Saturday there was a folk dance or sourdough dance club. And that was the big fun thing in those days. We square dancing and folk dancing. And we did that a lot. But then I had other dreams, and I was teaching. I always kept in touch with everything that was going on, and people had ideas, and I called them movers and shakers. And when I went to Fairbanks in 1953, when I went there in 1953, in August, my first year of teaching there, I'd already taught my 3 years in 1947 to 1950, and then I finished college. Oh, you asked me where I would. I went to the University of South Dakota in Vermilion for 2 years, and I just was very unhappy. That's after I'd quit teaching my little one-room schoolhouse. I was so unhappy because it wasn't what I was expecting. First of all, the teachers, I don't mean to sound like an egotist, but I don't think they had been teaching childhood education for years. They were terrible teachers, just not good at all. Didn't inspire me one bit. Anyway, but I decided I was going to finish college, so I had to do what I had to do. The other thing is the girls, my new friends, they all looked like models. Sure, I was really a country hick. I was a country hick. I didn't have the money to dress fancy. I hadn't had parental teaching of how to act, like a model. Anyway, here I was at the university, trying to achieve my dream, and I was surrounded by girls that truly looked like models. They had elegant clothes. Their hair was just so very, very stylish. And I never drank, I never smoked. So I didn't fit in with the crowd because it was sort of a party school, and I didn't fit in. And I wasn't going to change just to try to fit in. But I did have 2 friends that lived in the dorm. I didn't live in a sorority house. I lived in a dorm at the university. And in 1950, that was in 1950 when I was in that fall in 1950 after I'd quit teaching. and I, oh, let me finish up on that story. So I was really unhappy with the classes I was taking. I was happy because I didn't fit the circle of friends. And I thought, I just made the biggest mistake of my whole life by quitting teaching. I had a good job. People loved me. I loved them. I was learning a lot. And not only that, I gave up my boyfriend. Well, I was compounded because that fall I found out my boyfriend got married to somebody else. And so I thought, I just really goofed. I've messed up my whole life. But I was determined. I had this determination in my stature that whatever I did, I had to do well. And so I thought I gave all that up. So that's the past. I don't live that life anymore. I'm now working to finish college. So that next summer, 1951, my two new friends that lived in the dorm where I lived, we decided to apply for resort jobs. We applied for something that would be for summertime, And so we applied in Estes Park in Colorado. And then we applied, that was sort of a fancy place. We didn't get any return on that one. No offer for that one. But then we also applied to a sort of a home family type of resort. It was on Lake Como. Now, this is not Switzerland. Lake Como in Wisconsin. And it was run by two Danish men. And we it was families, mothers, who lived in the city, wanted to have their kids have a sort of a farm atmosphere. So they would come for the whole summer and be at Lake Como at this resort. And I love this. Each of us was appointed to a family. So we got well acquainted that summer with that family. I remember this one lady, she had 4 children that I learned to love, and I would play games with them at noon hour in the afternoon when we wanted to have some activities. Anyway, she played the piano and sang. And I was playing the piano and singing in those days. And that was in 1951. And in fact, that year, I was the oldest one of the waitresses. You had to be 21 or older in order to be working in a bar. And so they approached me and said, "Jo, I know you're the oldest of all waitresses, so you get to be the bartender." Here, I had never been in a bar in my life. Of course, I didn't have to mix any drinks, but I did have to learn all of the names of them. And one of them that fascinated me to this day is, in fact, the grasshopper, which was very pretty, made with cream and mint. At any rate, they had me serve, be the waitress in the bar, and also I got to, they put a tip jar out. I'd never heard of doing something like this, and I was singing and playing the piano, which was fun. I played the piano by ear, played some of the golden oldies that people all like. That was way back in 1952. Let's see. Then in 1952, in the summer, after I'd taken some courses, I went to summer school in 1952 at the University of South Dakota. I wanted to be sure to have enough credits so I would graduate the next year and get my 4-year teacher degree teacher certificate. And when I got home in mid-August, I was feeling a little bit blue. I got back home to the farm in South Dakota to visit my family. Feeling a little blue because I had just one more year that I had to do at the University of South Dakota. And I was not very excited about it. My piano teacher had moved from Aberdeen to Menlo Park, California when I was a junior in high school. So I missed telling you about the piano experiences that I had. And I've missed her. She was such a wonderful person and a wonderful teacher. And you know what I did? I got brave enough to make my very first ever in 1952 long distance phone call
What?
to, to, to Miss Remdy in Menlo Park, California. And through my tears, I said, "Oh, Miss Remdy, I miss you, and I'm not even taking piano lessons now." And I told her about what I was missing about and having better education and childhood education, and that I didn't fit because I was not a drinker or a smoker, and I was just crying, and I'm crying on her shoulder, and she was an old maid, and I just loved her, and she was beautiful, and she said, "Josephine, I have an idea. You can come out here to California, and there are 3 colleges right near me: San Jose State, San Francisco State, and Stanford. Now, you can we can send your at the University of South Dakota, send your transcripts." I had no idea how to do that. I had no idea about transcripts. I knew nothing. So Miss Remdy helped me through it all. She called the University of South Dakota and asked that my transcripts be sent directly to those 3 universities. And she said, "And Josephine, you could stay with me if we get accepted in one of these colleges, because this is in May. This is in August. School is going to be starting in about 2 weeks. You don't change colleges in the middle of August." Anyway, she said, "If you're accepted in any of these, why, you can come and live with me. I have a basement apartment. It's not fancy. And then for my room, you can clean my house once a week." She had a big house, big house. And she had roomers who she didn't feed them if it's just the beds. So I had to clean it. So that was my proposal. So we waited, and we waited for an answer from one of these schools. San Francisco State never answered my request. Stanford, I was accepted at Stanford, but they had closed their fall registration, and so I would have to wait until January to start school. I had absolutely no idea that it was a really prestigious thing to be accepted at Stanford University.
Way to go, Jo.
And I said to Miss Remdy, "I've been going to school for so many years. And she never told me. She never tried to guide me not to accept that. I just, in my own mind, I'd have to just do nothing until January, and then I wasn't even guaranteed that I'd be getting to graduate on that, in June. So anyway, so I canceled Stanford, but San Jose State loved me, and they accepted all my credits. And when I started there, I had to take the bus there every morning. That's 1952 and 1953. I graduated in June of 53. So I took the bus every morning and to get to my classes. And the teachers in California at that school were the best. And they were very much intrigued with my background, because here I was. I had already taught 3 years in a little one-room country schoolhouse. There was nobody else like me. And I ended up working hard. And in January, all of us graduating seniors were called to have a meeting so that we could learn how to write a good resume, because that's the secret. And so I learned how to write a good resume, and then we were told, now you've got to decide where you want to send your resumes. Well, I did not want to go back to South Dakota. I loved my family, but I didn't want to go back to South Dakota. I didn't want to stay in California. I almost accepted a job in Venezuela, because American schools were being built there because of the oil industry. Okay. I came within this close to choosing Venezuela. But then I remembered that at the University of South Dakota, I worked in the cafeteria. And of course, I got acquainted with everybody. In the summer months, there were a lot of teachers there. And I'm a new teacher I met there while I was serving out pancakes. She was from Cordova, Alaska. And she told me what a nice place Alaska was. So I remembered that. And so a couple of years later, when I was trying to decide where I wanted to apply to go to school, to teach school, I thought, I think I'll write to Alaska. So by that time, I'd gotten quite brave. I knew how to write a resume, and I knew how to try to sell myself in a good situation. So I sent my resumes to Fairbanks, Anchorage, Juneau, and the small little fishing village that this lady was from, Cordova. And I was accepted in all those schools, by all those. I was given a teacher's contract, offered a teacher's contract in all of those little communities. I studied, got to the library, good library, and I discovered that the only one of those places that had a university was Fairbanks. And the superintendent of Fairbanks was the only one who had his doctorate. So he called me up in California and said, hey, Miss Ryman, I really am interested in having you come and teach in Fairbanks. I think you'd like this place. And so I accepted that job offer in Fairbanks, Alaska. Let's see.
I want to ask you one last question, Jo, if you will. You've written this wonderful book. Why now? Why write something this late in life? Why not 20 years ago? And then why now?
Well, it all started when my husband and I started writing our stories together. This was 6 years ago that Dick and I were reminiscing how the fun we had and the travel. We had a lot of challenges. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of friends, and we knew Dick. Well, that's another story, but I'll just hastily say that Dick really worked hard. We moved the cabin in April of. We moved it and built a concrete basement in the summer of 1954. And then that Armistice Day, we moved the little cabin over the top of this concrete block basement. Can you watch what I'm doing? Can you think what it was? Just imagine a cabin sitting next to a big excavation. We had to move it on top of that excavation and get it right on top of the basement box, just like it's supposed to be. Dick and his buddy did that, but that's the story in the book. All right, but that was one of the things that Dick and I had so much fun with, because you know what I was doing while they were moving the house across that open basement? No. I was in the house baking bread and making a nice dinner for my dear husband. Wasn't that sweet of me? Not very smart. Again, so it relates back to my days of tying the horse's tail. It was a good idea, but it wasn't the best idea. But it turned fine. They worked okay, and then the next year after Dick passed away, my daughter Shirley said, "Mom, keep writing those stories."
Yeah.
And it was a very healing thing to do, because Dick and I had been married almost 67 years. We loved each other yet. Sometimes we didn't like each other. You know what I mean? But we always loved each other. And he was almost 93. I was almost 91 when he passed. And writing the stories after his passing was a good thing to do to keep me busy, because I had to be busy doing something. I've done a lot of things for the arts in Fairbanks. I started a big arts festival, and that's really a story in itself. The book has about 40 pages about the arts festival that I started.
Yeah.
And I had such fun teaching. I did some in creative things, like I had a art in action program. But all that stories are in the book, and not it was it's been fun. That I retired from this festival that I started. I retired when I was 80 in 2009.
Wow.
And my goal was, it was giving my time all those years to produce this big festival. And it had grown and grown. The last year I was there in 2009, we had almost 1,000 registrants who came from all over the world. And we had over 100 master teachers and performers. And what I was sure nobody'd come along and do it for nothing anymore. And so I decided my goal was to try to get a good endowment fund established. And so there's a good story about that. I got, and when I left the festival, I left a good amount of money in the bank, and I had a $1.3 million endowment.
Wow.
And
look at you, Jo.
Well,
that's great. Let me wrap this thing up, because we're over an hour, and I don't want to waste one more minute of your time doing this. I appreciate you so much for coming on. Everybody, the link for the book is right down below. It's also in the show notes and the full show.
Okay.
So if you guys want to get it.
Yeah, just a second, just unedited.
Please, Jo.
Teresa is working on getting it online now on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what her trouble is, but she told us that she was just having some troubles. And we know that Teresa.
It's online now, Jo. I actually bought it today. I bought 2 copies.
Okay, then
end of the month.
Because they were begging me to say anything online until.
Okay.
Well,
everybody go online and buy this thing. Pre-sales. It'll be there, and I'll see the dates are on there now. So don't worry about that at all. Everything's great. Jo, you are an absolute delight. Here is the cover of her book one more time. And then here is the link one more time. Look at that. I'm going to get this cover out of the way and let you hold your cover up. Hold your book up there, Jo. Look at that thing. How can you not love that? It's perfect. Almost
60 pages long. And for you, my older readers, I purposely asked for larger print because we don't read as well easily as we used to read. So I did. It's very exciting.
I'm so
grateful. I can't get over Teresa. She's just a gem, and she has more clever ideas than you can see. But with her ideas, they're all good ones. They're not dumb ones like tying the horse's tail.
Tying your brother's tail to something. No, I love it. That's so great.
See, so it's look at how thick it is. It's about 600 pages.
All right.
I'm old.
Big
I'm
print.
96. I'm old, so it's good. I'm long. I've lived a long time, so it has to be a long book.
I love it. Everybody, this is Jo. You guys got to get her book. You always say buy 2, book club it. Start a new book club. You guys know what to do with this. Jo, thank you very much for coming on. Anything you want to say before you wrap this thing up?
I thank you. I thank all the wonderful people that helped me do the things that I dreamed about doing. It's not a one-woman show. I'm very grateful.
Right, stand by and I'll say goodbye to you. Everybody else, I'll see you, I guess, tomorrow. And you'll not believe this next guest, too. They're all amazing around here. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.